chidush about Masechet Bava Metzia to add to Rav David now. Finishing Masechet Baruch Hashem. Be'emet, listen, you teach in Bava Metzia. I believe it's around page 30, 31, something like that. There's a machloket. The machloket as always. The question is, who is your rabbi? Who is your rabbi? Rabbi Yossi says, it's the one that taught you divrei chokhmah. What's divrei chokhmah? Divrei chokhmah is Gemara. Why? Because it's considered the most difficult part of Torah. Most difficult. You know, Chumash is nice, Mishnah is nice, but to delve down deep into the lava of Torah, that's Gemara. So Rabbi Yossi says, listen, your teacher that taught you Chumash, Chazaku Baruch. Your teacher that taught you Mishnah, Chazaku Baruch. But the one that taught you Gemara, that's your rabbi. Rabbi Yehuda says, no. The one that taught you most of what you know. Most of what you know. You learned Torah 10, 20, 30, 50 years. You're not going to have one rabbi usually. You're going to have multiple rabbis. So let's say you have 10 rabbis throughout your life. But one guy, one tzaddik, taught you 40% of what you know, and the other 9 taught you the other 60%. So obviously the one that taught you 40%, he's your Rav. Right? But then Rabbi Meir gives us a chidush. He says, no. I'm sorry, Rabbi Meir is the first one, Rabbi Yossi is the last one. Rabbi Yossi is the one that gives us a chidush. And he says, no. We learn from David HaMelech, anyone that teaches you even 2 Mishnayot, 2 things in the Torah, that's your Rav. That's your Rav. Where we learn it from? How David HaMelech called its arch nemesis. His arch nemesis, he called him Rabbi, Mori. Gave him all these kinuim, all these compliments, Rabbi. For what? For teaching them 2 Mishnayot, which the Chazal says he actually already knew one of them. He already knew one of them, but he taught him 2. Said, he's my rabbi. So what do we learn from here? Actually wrote an article about this maybe about a year and a half ago. What do they all have in common? Machloket, we understand. What do we actually learn from here? We learn from here that the common opinion, the common denominator amongst all of these sages is the definition of a teacher. Definition of a rabbi is a teacher. Meaning anyone that teaches Torah is considered a rabbi. So this also answers the question and the confusion we have in today's world, where people actually talked about this recently, but it's always worth it to remind people of this. There's a lot of confusion today about people asking about smicha. You know, whether a rabbi has a smicha, whether a rabbi doesn't have a smicha. Sometimes they find out that some big rabbis don't have a smicha. Sometimes they find out that small rabbis have a smicha. You know, in Hebrew, smicha also means cover, like a blanket. So I say, oh, he has a pillow too. He's sleeping, he's not rebuking his people. But in reality, the smicha that is mentioned in the Torah, which the first time it's mentioned is when Moshe Rabbeinu gave a smicha to Yeshua ben Nun. And in the Gemara, it actually talks about how when he gave him this, when he put his hands on his head, he didn't just give him, hey, Chazaku Baruch, go take over the land. He actually gave him part of his abilities. His abilities to become a vessel of Torah from Hashem. Because to receive Torah, it's not like, hey, listen Hashem, send me some Torah, send me a email and I'll know everything. I'll read the email, I know the whole Shas by heart. You have to earn it. Mesirut Nefesh. So Yeshua ben Nun wasn't exactly known as the Gdol Adol. He was the Gabbai. He was the one that cleaned the Beit Knesset when everybody went home. But he was always there for Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu went Mount Sinai, Yeshua ben Nun waited over there until Moshe Rabbeinu came back. Everybody's idol worshipping, Yeshua ben Nun is waiting. Moshe says, okay, go to Canaan, which is later to be called Israel. Go check it out. But here's a special blessing for Yeshua ben Nun, in case these Reshaim try to convince you to do otherwise. Everybody in there does a foolish thing of saying Lashon Hara about the land. and Kalev and Yeshua ben Nun are the only tzaddikim. So, even though Moshe Rabbeinu wanted his children, either Eliezer or Gershom, to become the Gdolei Ador, to become the leaders, to become the kings, Hashem said no. They're not the ones. Who is it going to be? It's Yeshua ben Nun. Why? Because one trait that he has that's better than everyone else except Moshe Rabbeinu is the humblest man of the land. And when you're humble, automatically you become a vessel for Torah, a vessel for connecting to Hashem. But if you're one of these people, like I was laughing about in last week's shiurim, I have a guy, he calls himself a Rav, and we're having a little bit of a debate. It's really, he's debating himself, I'm just trying to show him why he's wrong. And no, not because I know it, because that's what it says in the Torah. Don't think I'm some genius. Just what it says in Torah. He doesn't read it, I read it, so it's not Hashem. One day I'll actually read it. Anyway, and he says to me, people love my teachings. He's about himself. He says, people love my teachings because, to teach, you have to be honest and you have to be humble. And I'm honest and I'm humble. I listened to the recording maybe 10 times that day. Laughing myself. I'm like, does he understand the definition of humble? The definition of humble means you're not saying that you're humble. And usually honest people don't tell people they're honest. You just show them you're honest. Usually when you say, listen, trust me, that means I'm not going to trust you. Tell you the truth means I'm about to tell you a lie. Or you've been lying to me all along until now. So Yeshua ben Nun had, it's a reality.
On Wall Street.
It's a figure of speech, but nonetheless, the point is that if you're doing something and you feel a need to prove yourself, there's something wrong. Either something wrong with the relationship, something wrong with the way you're expressing yourself, something wrong with the other person. Obviously, it's not 100% where you want it to be. But Yeshua ben Nun got to his full potential, became Gdol Ador. Now, one of the main things that we see from this week's Mishnah we're going to go over is that every single one of these rabbis, every single one of these Tanaim Kedoshim, had a very similar midah, obviously everybody in their own level, but they're all humble. Every one of them was extremely humble. Now in the Gemara Bava Metzia, the Tanaim argue who is an actual Rav. And they say anyone that teaches Torah is the Rav. He's a Rav. But in the old days, when Yeshua ben Nun got the smicha, it's not that he became a Rav. He didn't become a local Chabad rabbi, or Breslov rabbi, or Orthodox shul rabbi, or Shem Rachem, or Reform shul or something. No, it's not that type of rabbi. What does it mean when they had a smicha? Both Yeshua ben Nun and all over the Gemara. A smicha in the Gemara is the equivalent of a posek, not a rabbi. Smicha in the Gemara means you made laws. Yeshua ben Nun made laws. He says yes, yes. Says no, no.
The judge, right?
Tet, he's the judge and he rules. This is what Hashem, this is what my understanding of this halacha is. Final. Tet, posek, that's the halacha. So in the Gemara where it mentions Rabbi this, Rabbi that, Rabbi this, everybody's like, oh look, he's a rabbi, and the 18-year-old little Chabadnik is a rabbi too. Psh, wow. Look, he's Rav, and this other guy calls himself also Rav, from this generation. Same thing? Not same thing. First and foremost, anyone that had a smicha in those days, like I said, they were considered a posek. They were considered a dayan. They were considered a judge that was actually able to implement halacha. Now, after some time, after Yavne and a lot of balagan that happened to Am Yisrael, eventually this all stopped. We were not able to, because of all the terrible things that happened to Am Yisrael throughout the generations, we were not able to continue this tradition, and for some time it stopped. But eventually they brought it back to call people rabbis, but it became very, very different. A rabbi became more of like a job title than it did have anything to do with, being a posek. As a matter of fact, some of the biggest giants in history for many years didn't even want to call themselves rabbi at all. They just wanted to call themselves by the name. But nonetheless, the whole concept of smicha that's misunderstood today is that everybody could take a test. And if you pass a test, you could technically get the job description or title, rabbi. Now, the problem with this is that it's very, very misleading, because the rabbi title doesn't actually tell you what kind of smicha you got. Because what happens is, it actually doesn't even mean that you have a smicha. It just, you have a job title. And let's say you pass a test, let's say you got... Now, there's many, many smichas. There's many different types of tests. The first one that most people take is for shchita, for being a slaughter, for being a butcher, and slaughtering kosher slaughter. It requires a special skill. That's usually the most common buchaba. The most common one that people start off with. If you don't mind turning on the air conditioner because I'm melting. God bless you guys. You're not melting, but I have hot blood. But anyway, the smicha was that he's a butcher. So the guy is now he's a butcher now, but he's not going to be a butcher. Most people that get the smicha for butcher, they're not becoming a butcher. It's just that this is like usually the first test until you get the next one. Next one, maybe you're going to be a moel, or you're going to be a rabbi for a keilah, or you're going to be a rabbi for let's say to do chuppah and kiddushim. Or you're going to be a rabbi that's going to, be an expert in tarat mishpacha, like David HaMelech. Women are going to bring you the, they check themselves every month. They're going to say if this is good, this is not good. People think this is embarrassing, but just so you know, this was David HaMelech's job as a king. As a king, this is what he did. As a king, he writes in Tehillim, Hashem. Everybody else is, excited about their glory, their money, their this. I'm excited about being a rabbi. What kind of rabbi was? He would check tarat mishpacha. Women would come to him and show him, is this blood from a wound, or is this blood from my uterus? If it's from a wound, you're good to go. You can be with your husband, bring children to the world, B'ezrat Hashem tzadikim kedoshim. But if it's blood from the uterus, Shem Rachem, nida. And this very same guy that said, I'm humble and I'm honest, what's the debate? The debate is, he actually said in a lecture that if somebody does tshuva, Jew does tshuva, his wife doesn't feel like doing tshuva. Doesn't feel like it. He does tshuva. It happens a lot, unfortunately. It happens a lot. Unfortunately, it leads to sometimes, sometimes it leads to divorce, or it leads to problems. Not everybody wants to do, not everybody's always on the same wavelength. But sometimes, they're supporting anyway. The husband does tshuva, the wife doesn't feel like it, but she supports him. Listen, you do what you got to do. You do. You want to study, study. You want to do this, but just don't tell me what to do. Or opposite. The husband says, listen, you want to be tznuah, you want to be modest, you want to cover your hair, you want to do whatever you want. I don't want to do it. I don't want to keep Shabbat. That's a decent human being. Even though he's not doing tshuva, he's a decent human being. Now, on the other hand, sometimes you have reshaim. What's a rasha? They do everything they can to stop the other one.
Purpose.
Dafka, I'm going to watch TV on Shabbat. Never watched TV in his life, but on Shabbat I'll watch TV just to ruin your Shabbat. Dafka, I'm going to bring tarif to the house. Why? The kosher is right next aisle. And it's on discount today. Discount. Sale. First time in history kosher food's on sale. No, I like the pig. Why do you like the pig? The steak is delicious. Until today, 30 years we're married, you like the steak that's... What happened? Dafka. Dafka, they're miskenim. These people are miskenim. What can you do? What can you do? You try to help these people, but it's very, very difficult sometimes. But anyway, you have different situations, different people doing different things. There are certain times where you have to try to help them fix the marriage. But there are certain conditions where you have to tell them they must divorce immediately. One of the conditions, the main condition of forcing someone that they have to divorce immediately, is if one of them is not willing to keep tarat mishpacha. Meaning, if the husband is not willing to wait for his wife to go to the mikveh before he's with her, he's not willing to be separated from her for approximately 12 days of the month. Approximately, it's not, depends on the woman, and obviously different women have different times. If he's not willing to wait and let her go to the mikveh and be pure by the time they're together, she must divorce him. Must. And this is not like maybe. This is not chumrah. This is not Kabbalah. This is basic level halacha. Without taharat mishpacha, there's no marriage. On the opposite, if he's married to her, he's do tzaddik. But she says, listen, I'm never going to the mikveh. It's not happening. Mikveh and Mia are enemies. Never going to the mikveh. You have a tale, you have rabbis that say you're allowed to stay with her, but obviously never allowed to touch her. You're allowed to stay with her, like Rav Uri Zohar, before he became one of the giants of the KIRUV movement in the last generation. He did tshuva. His wife didn't want to do tshuva. For years she didn't want to do tshuva. He wasn't able to be with his wife for many years. But his rabbi kept telling him, listen, eventually she was going to do tshuva. She's going to do tshuva, and eventually she did tshuva. But he kept telling him, like, Kvod Harav, I can't be with her because she doesn't want to go to the mikveh. He goes, don't be with her. Hold yourself. As long as you can hold yourself, hold yourself. But in general, if the wife is not willing to go to mikveh, not only are you not allowed to be with her, you are at right to divorce her immediately without paying her ketubah. Without paying her ketubah. So now when somebody that calls himself a Rav, that's humble and honest, he says to people, listen, if your wife doesn't want to go to mikveh, you can be with her anyway. This is a Isur Karet. It's Isur Karet. Now if somebody's with his wife, when she's nida, when she didn't go to the mikveh, the punishment is the worst punishment in the Torah. Karet, death penalty. Death penalty. It's actually worse. It's worse than incest. Now we think in this generation, Baruch Hashem, we still think incest is not good. We're not sure about next generation, but this generation was still okay. In that regards, at least. If somebody says, listen, this guy was with his sister, everybody cringes. Like, ichs. What's wrong with you? This guy was his mother. Even more ichs. If I'm telling you that Hashem, the creator, the manufacturer, he says him with his wife, when she's nida, is worse. Worse punishment. So now you understand. So when a Rav, that's humble and honest, says the opposite of Hashem, it's a problem.
He also said about Shabbat.
It's a problem. It says about Shabbat. If he says this, he says a lot of things. So now we know that just because somebody calls himself a Rav, that's humble and honest, doesn't necessarily mean he's a Rav that's humble and honest. It also doesn't necessarily mean he has a smicha. But just because he doesn't have a smicha doesn't necessarily mean anything either. Now, the chidush that we got from Masechet Bava Metzia about Rav is that if you teach, you're a Rav. Now, one thing that most people in this generation don't know is that there is no smicha available. You cannot get a smicha. There's no test to teach. There is no smicha for teaching.
So anyone can be a Rav.
You start teaching, you're a Rav. He just taught us he's a rabbi. Now, when I first heard about this, I'm a very skeptical person. So I asked my rabbi, and he says, yes, of course. I'm like, yeah, but this doesn't look good. He goes, well, let's see. Rabbi Ovadia, Zecher Tzadik V'Kadosh Livracha, he never took a test. He didn't take a smicha test. But why did they give him, not only make him a Rav, they made him Av Bedin, Rishon LeZion, Gdol HaDorot. Why? He was called a Gaon Mukar. A term called Gaon Mukar means a known genius. Meaning it's to a point where it's embarrassing to give him a test. There is no test for somebody like this. You just give him number one. This is the Moshe Rabbeinu of the generation. What are you going to give Moshe Rabbeinu a test? He spoke to God 5 minutes ago. What test are you going to give him? You're going to ask him what God said to him? He wrote it in the Torah. You have it. It's called 5 books of Moses, not 5 books of Yaron. 5 books of Moses. What are you going to give him a test? What does Pashat Naso say about Sotah? What are you going to give him a test? He wrote it. Rav Eliashiv, same thing. Rav Eliashiv, Gdol HaDor, one of the biggest giants in history. Rav Eliashiv, he didn't take a test. And many, many rabbis that are giants never took a test. There's no smicha. Why? For them, what are they taking a test for? As a matter of fact, many of the top lecturers, people that give lectures, also never took a smicha. Number one, because there's no smicha for being a lecturer. Number two, if I'm going to go take, say for example, people always ask me, did you take a test? And I always tell them no. Well, am I stupid? No, I had 8 licenses in the securities list. So just in case someone thinks I have a problem passing tests, Baruch Hashem, I was able to pass some tests. Each security license average questions between 100 to 260 questions at 8 different licenses. Each one is equivalent to the bar. Bar for lawyers, each one at 8 of them. 9 licenses. Okay, so I was able to pass tests in the past. I went in school, I was a good Talmid Chacham in secular knowledge, so it's not the test. Why didn't I take the test? Because if I go now, spend, let's say, 2 years in yeshiva just to learn shchita, or just to learn something else, that means I can't do kiruv. So Mashiach is going to come and say, hey, Yaron, how are you? I say, hey, Baruch Hashem, how you doing? He says, well, listen, in the last 2 years that you got your smicha, another 1.5 million Jews signed a deed to buy an apartment first class in Gehenom because they didn't do tshuva. Chazaku Baruch for your smicha. What are you going to do with the smicha? How are people going to do tshuva from sitting in the yeshiva, getting a smicha for slaughtering? So that's why people need to understand. Again, before you jump, attack, learn a little bit. Learn what it means. Learn what it says. And Gemara Masechet Bava Metzia says that. Another